Hey guys, it's Karnik, Star Wars Armada Explained. It's your buddy, it's your pal. Here we are with Surprise Attack. Hopefully this is the last time I have to shoot this video, because my first attempt was discovering that there is an issue with the Super Star Destroyer and Surprise Attack, so I had to reshoot the video for a second time to make a personal ruling about how to play the objective, because at that time it was a game-breaking state with the Super Star Destroyer in that objective. For some reason, it just didn't get caught in testing. And at that point, I had to make a personal ruling about how to play that objective. We finally have the new FAQ, which addresses all of that. I am 99.9% happy with that ruling. It was along the same lines of what I'd already had guessed what was going to happen, so I'm very happy that I was able to figure that out. So this is hopefully the last time I'll ever have to shoot this video, and so let's dive right in. So there's a lot of wording in Surprise Attack, and but for the most part, it's fairly straightforward. It's not overly complicated, especially now with the clarification. So let's go ahead and read the card. So there's only two parts of this card: stuff that happens in setup, and then there's a special rule. And by and large, most of the stuff just takes place in setup. So let's read it. Setup. The second player places the station at distance 1 to 5 of the first player's edge, then place the remaining obstacles as normal. While deploying fleets, the first player must deploy their flagship before deploying any other ships. Their flagship must overlap the station, even if the flagship extends beyond their deployment zone. The first player cannot deploy any ship at a speed greater than half of that ship's maximum speed, rounded up. After deploying fleets, the second player places 3 face-down command dials in a stack on this card. And special rule: at the start of the ship phase, during the first, second, and third rounds, the second player reveals the top command dial on this card in each of the first player's ships, gains a Ray token matching the revealed dial. Now here's the FAQ that clarifies the Super Star Destroyer and how stuff can be placed. During setup, the station can be placed beyond or overlapping the first player's deployment zone. There was some confusion with this from before. It wasn't confusing for people who knew the rules, but for other people, I'll explain that in a moment. While deploying fleets, if the first player's flagship is a huge ship, it must overlap the station and also touch that player's edge, if able. If that flagship cannot meet both restrictions, it must be placed overlapping the station with its rear hull zone as close as possible to that player's edge. Alright, because before, the SSD had a rule restriction of it can't overlap obstacles. And also with this objective, it was possible to place other obstacles like in the way, so that the Super Star Destroyer literally could not deploy overlapping the station while overlapping other obstacles. So the ruling I made at that time was just try to avoid overlapping obstacles, and if you have to, just do it, because you're already breaking its first rule. Now they've clarified it. They said, hey, as it was said there in the FAQ, just pretty much do the best you can. Because before, some people were trying to think that, oh, it just has to overlap, so you could do something like that, which is that's game breaking and ridiculous. So I'm glad that they didn't continue with that, and they went with more towards how I thought they were going to rule it. Okay, so let's start with the first part. The second player places the station at distance 1 to 5 of the first player's edge, then place the remaining obstacles as normal. So when you look from the bottom, this first horizontal line is distance 1 to 3, which is that player's deployment zone. And then the distance 1 to 5 is just for reference of, where essentially squadrons or potentially other things could go out. So some people were looking at the original wording and say, oh, I can place it at 1 to 5 of the first player's edge, which means I can place it way over here, out in this space. And no, no, absolutely not, because the objective is not overriding setup rules, which states all obstacles need to be placed within the setup area. It doesn't specifically state 1 to 5 of the first player's edge in the play area, okay, because the play area is the entire map. These two vertical lines signify anything within is the setup area. So some people, I don't know why, but they were getting confused about that. But as it clarifies here, during setup, the station can be placed beyond or overlapping the first player's deployment zone. Okay, and what some people didn't quite understand was they didn't know that you could place the station at, like this, at distance 1 to 5 of the first player's edge. And we're going to say the Imperial player on the bottom is the first player. So that is a totally legal placement because you see there, it's right at distance 5. Or if you wanted to place it here, or here, or here, again, it can't be placed outside of the setup area though. It needs to be in the setup area. Okay. So that's, again, it's the first step. Place the station at distance 1 to 5. And for this example, we're just going to say something like that. Perfect. Okay. Then place the remaining obstacles as normal, which starts with the second player. So we're going to go ahead and toss some obstacles out there, or say that they just kind of threw them everywhere. Not going to worry too much about it. Okay, while deploying fleets, the first player must deploy their flagship before deploying any other ships. This example, we're going to say that the flagship is the Super Star Destroyer. As it says in the clarification, it must overlap the station and also touch that first player's edge. So it can be something like this, or if you wanted to turn it and be something, let's see here if I can do that. Yep, if you want to do something like that, for example. Okay, and again, that is a legal, for example, Super Star Destroyer deployment. Now, what happens if, for example, this obstacle was placed in the way and there's just no way that it could accomplish a deployment being able to do that? As it says there in the clarification, you need to place the Super Star Destroyer overlap in a station with its rear hull zone as close as possible to that player's edge. So it needs to do something like this. Either like that, or if you did turn it to be something like this, you could do something like that. Perfect. Okay, so the rear still needs to be as close as possible to your edge. And again, as specified, you can never deploy ships outside of the setup area. Again, some people were thinking you could do something crazy like this. If Vassal will catch up. People were thinking you could do something like that, which again, that's ridiculous. The objective doesn't say anything about being able to accomplish that. So again, I don't know how people were misinterpreting that. But that you can't do something like this. Again, ships still need to be deployed in the setup area. This objective does not break that. Okay. Anything else I'm missing from the FAQ? No. Okay. And so for the Super Star Destroyer, what's the next part here? So you have to deploy overlap in the station. So we're going to go ahead and move this obstacle out of the way. We're going to do something like this just to get this back into a legal game state. Something like that. Perfect. All right, so what's the second part? First player must deploy their flagship before deploying any other ships. So it has to be your flagship regardless of what ship it is. That needs to go down very first thing as the first player. Their flagship must overlap the station even if the flagship extends beyond their deployment zone. So for example, if we weren't using a Super Star Destroyer, and we're using a regular Star Destroyer, so when you're placing it, as it's saying, you can extend beyond your deployment zone. So if you want to do something like this, that's fine. You're still overlapping the station. Or if you want to do something like this, again, that's fine because you're still technically, on the station even though you're extended beyond your deployment zone. Now, one thing I do want to point out is that shield dials, for the purposes of overlapping, as stated in the rulebook, count as overlapping, the shield dials that stick out from the ship. So if you wanted to do something like this, even though the physical ship base is not on the station, shield dials are considered part of the base for the purposes of overlapping only. Not for anything else, just for overlapping. So this is considered overlapping the station because that's what shield dials count towards. So something like that, something like that, something like that, or again, if you want to put your whole base on it. Perfect. And you have to go half the speed of what is listed on your ship's, the speed on your ship's ship card. The first player cannot deploy any ship at the speed greater than half of that ship's maximum speed rounded up. So for example, the Star Destroyer can go up to a maximum of speed 3. So when it deploys, half is 1.5, rounded up is 2. It can go a maximum of speed 1 or speed 2. Anything that's speed 4 can go 1 to 2. Again, anything that's 3 can go 1 to 2. And anything that's 2 or speed 1, which there are no ships that can only go speed 1, but if they could, those ships can only go a maximum of speed 1. Perfect. Okay? So we're going to go ahead and say that the Star Destroyer there is the flagship for this purpose. It's going to go ahead and go at speed 2. Done all that after deploying fleets. So this is after all the ships have been placed down on the board. We're going to say something like this. Okay, all the ships have been deployed in squadrons on both sides. So now you're in the after deploying fleets timing phase. The second player places 3 face-down command dials in a stack on this card. And that's going to come into effect as the gameplay progresses from there. So we've got our 3 command dials, and you place them on a stack on this card, like a regular command stack. Now, I wish they had clarified this slightly, but I mean, it's really hard to not know what the intent of this is. Anyone that tries to argue otherwise is just being argumentative. Is that the card never specifies that the second player actually sets what commands on the command dials. It just says take 3 dials and put them on this card. It never actually says that the second player can actually set commands and then order those command dials in any way that he wants on the stack. They don't have to spell that out. The intent is obviously heavily implicated that the second player can set whatever command that he wants on those dials, order them in any way that he wants, and place them on that card. Again, anyone that tries to be argumentative and state that, oh, you can't preset the dial and do that's just don't be that guy. Don't be difficult. If you want to be quote unquote technically correct, you can, but no TO is gonna rule that way. You know, that's just ridiculous because that's obviously not the intent of the card. And I would never support a player trying to argue that. I don't think any TO would. But I'm just pointing it out just because that's part of the reason for my videos is to point out these little things. Okay. So what are these command dials then used for? Well, at the start of the first, second, and third rounds in the command stack order that you have placed, the second player will then reveal the top command dial. And whatever the command is on that command dial, all the ships gain a matching raid token. And again, for raid, what it means that unless they clear that raid token, they're not able to resolve that command. Which raid can only be cleared when a ship reveals a command dial, that's the only time, and they can only do it in one of 2 ways. Either they discard their command dial to clear all raid tokens, or they discard a single command token to clear a single raid token of the matching type. That's the only time you can get rid of raid. You can't get rid of raid in the middle of a ship's activation. It's only when you reveal a command dial. So this obviously gives second player a lot of information in terms of, I know where your flagship is at, I know he's going slow, I'm raiding your ships the whole time. So it's a very powerful and strong objective. In terms of some other intricate timing windows I want to make sure I'm pointing out, like for example in the after deploying fleets, when the second player places the 3 face down command dials in the stack, remember timing. So in after deploying fleets, the first player needs to resolve all of his timing first, like for example setting price or bail or command dials, etc., that kind of stuff in the after deploying fleet section. Then the second player can then get some information what the first player's done, and he can kind of match maybe what those raid tokens are to match, or the raid dials are to match. Again, same thing with the special rule about at the start of the ship phase. Again, it's in the second player's timing when he reveals that dial. So the first player actually has to do all of his start of the ship phase commands first, like for example, executing any fleet commands, or if he's got Tarkin, he has to Tarkin out tokens, or if it's Thrawn, he has to reveal dials, etc. Then the second player can do his stuff after that. Alright. Let's see if I'm missing anything that I need to go over. There's one more thing I just double checking. So again, the station can't be placed outside the setup area. Ships can't be deployed outside the setup area. Again, you still need to follow other huge ship SSD rules. And yeah, we went over timings. So the last thing I need to go over now is how does Corvus work? So Corvus is a title for the Raider, which essentially allows it to redeploy. So if you got your Admiral on Corvus, Corvus is kind of a soft counter to surprise attack, because even though Corvus is the first ship that needs to be deployed, and again can only be deployed at speed 2, when does Corvus take place? Corvus takes place after deploying fleets. You may redeploy the ship within your deployment zone. So the restrictions of surprise attack are only in the actual physical setup of while deploying. So when Corvus redeploys after deploying fleets, it can redeploy back into your deployment zone and it is no longer restricted by the speed restriction. If you wanted to set it to speed 3 or 4, you absolutely can do that, because again, surprise attack speed restriction is only while deploying fleets, not in the after deploying fleets. So Corvus is a counter, but again, then you have to bring a Raider, you have to bring Corvus, etc. But I want to make sure I was covering that. But that surprise attack, now that we've got the FAQ, it's a very clear objective, it's a very good objective. But if you feel like I missed anything, or if you still have questions about something, please be sure to leave a comment, point it out, let me know. You guys are all fantastic, and hey, I'll catch you all later.